Hi, my name is Mizzy, and I'm a mixed girl in a mixed up world. I am doing a series of interviews with the mother of Brandon Embry, a 33-year-old Navy veteran who was found beaten, bloody, and naked in his Asheboro, North Carolina apartment on September 12th, 2019. He later succumbed to his wounds and passed on September 13th, 2019. His mother is doing everything she can to find out what happened to her son because the police did not do their job. The medical examiner didn't do her job. This case is a perfect example of why we need police reform in this country. Every victim deserves justice. Brandon Embry deserves justice. His family deserves justice. This case was closed and put on a shelf, and the evidence was destroyed. Bad police officers move up in the ranks and become bad, incompetent detectives. This case shows that. Now, there are going to be some very, very disturbing images shown in this video. I put up a warning. I have reserved the most disturbing images for the end of the video. Please watch the entire video. The world needs to see what was done to Brandon. The world needs to know that he did not do this to himself, that he was murdered and the police did not do their job and even try to solve the case. They didn't even do simple detective work that probably could have solved the case. This is a case that I hope you will watch every episode and help spread, make this go viral, because his case needs to get out there so it can be reopened. Please help us find out who murdered Brandon Embry. I have a very special guest today who needs to get her story out. It is the murder of her son. That it's an unsolved murder, and we desperately need to get this story out there. Let me introduce her. Her name is Sarah. Sarah, welcome to A Mixed Girl in a Mixed Up World.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and having this conversation with me.
You're welcome. Now, tell me about your son.
Brandon was 33 years old. He had been going to school in Seattle. He was a student at University of Washington, and he had a few different reasons, but we asked him, if he would like to come and live near us. And then his plan was that he would come to North Carolina, get his residency, and then finish school here. He loved his video games. He loved to read. Yes. And he was introverted, but he was also very thoughtful, very kind. He was generous, and he was like that to everyone. I never remember anyone ever saying anything bad about Brandon. The neighbors even said nice things, that he would always be friendly. So a lot of people describe him just as a teddy bear. Wow. And he just was always someone that you felt very comfortable with. I never felt that he was judgmental, but he was very intelligent, and I loved talking to him, and I loved being able to have conversations, and he always had so much to contribute and thoughts on so many subjects, and he was just super, super smart.
Yeah, everything that I've read up on him, he sounded like he was a very intelligent young man that had, the future bright for him. Yeah. I am so sorry. This is how we are doing. Nobody ever wants to sit down and have a conversation about their son being murdered. And I commend you for the strength and the poise that you display in all the videos that you post and all the interviews I've seen you do. You have this inner strength that is a gift. It's a gift to Brandon because you are elegantly fighting for him. You're not out there angrily doing it. I know you probably have a rage within you that his murder has not been solved, but you are doing it in such an amazing way that I admire, because you're doing it with inner strength instead of outward strength. And that's a very special gift to trying to figure out what has happened to your son.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. When did he join the military? He was a Navy man, right?
Yes. So he had graduated high school, and he actually looked, just right out of high school, and he looked at a couple of jobs right around where we were living. And I remember one in particular was a McDonald's, and they didn't call him back. And then he ends up going to talk to a recruiter. And the next thing we know, he's, joining the Navy. And then later, when he's in the Navy and he has his schools and he has a hard day, and he was just joking, but we laugh about this one, but he said that he just regretted that McDonald's didn't hire him. And of course he was joking. He did well in the Navy. But we thought that was really funny.
What did he do in the Navy?
He was a submariner. He was on a nuclear submarine. He went through the nuclear program. He was a machinist mate that was responsible for keeping the nuclear reactor going on the submarine.
He had a special set of skills.
Yes, he did.
Wow.
And he was attached to the USS Chicago. At the time that he was in the USS Chicago was I think it was dry docked, but it was for repairs. It was at Pearl Harbor, but then they eventually did go underway, and he got to go to various ports and travel underwater around the world.
Wow, that must have been a odd but amazing in some ways, and also like kind of like the scary of the unknown experience for him. He's dealing with the nuclear part of the submarine. So
yeah.
Let's I want to do like a quick glossing over of what happened to him, and then we'll get deep into the details later on. Brandon was found beaten, bloody, and naked in his bedroom in September, not too long after his birthday. And can you tell me just a little bit of what happened that day, that from your perspective?
So I had been getting some texts from Brandon after his birthday. I wanted to take him to lunch, and I didn't want to wait too long after the birthday. I had a place in mind that I wanted to take him. And so I was thinking that we were going to go like maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. His birthday had been that past Saturday. But I had got some texts from him, and they were kind of odd.
Yeah.
But I didn't put a whole lot into it. I did feel that they were kind of odd. And then I started calling him because I wanted to make this plan to take him to lunch and everything. And he wasn't answering my calls. And I did start getting worried. Like, I thought, why is he not answering me? And I kind of dismissed. I thought, well, maybe he's out somewhere, like just busy doing something, and he'll call me back as soon as he can. But he never called back. And
is that usual for him? Not to call, not necessarily right back, but does he usually call you back when you call him?
Yeah, like I was like looking back through things, and there was one time that I had called him and he was on his way home from work. And so he shot me a text and said, I'm on an important call, I'll call you back. So, I just felt like, and I had been helping him. He was going to move his company was based out of Charlotte, and he was living in Asheboro, which is around 2 hours away. So it was a 2-hour commute. He did a lot of traveling with work, but because of that long commute, he did want to move closer. And I've been spending a lot of time with him, helping him get his apartment packed up. So I just felt like we, especially at that time, had a really good rapport and communication going. And I really do feel like if he was available, he would call me back. So I was starting to
text you back.
Yeah.
I'll call you back tomorrow or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was really feeling, like puzzled of why he wasn't calling me. We'll say it was like Wednesday night. He still had not answered my call. And you know how that mother's intuition is. So, so it was Wednesday night, and he still hadn't answered me. I was up later. I was watching something I got into on Netflix, and I just felt that there was something wrong. Yeah. But where Brandon lived, I really didn't feel would be a good idea for me to go by myself. And I get this feeling, but then I tried to dismiss it like, well, he's probably playing a video game, or, you don't want to think bad thoughts.
Yes.
But then I had called my daughter even, and I said, I've been trying to get a hold of Brandon and he doesn't answer me. So first thing in the morning, I want to go check on him.
Had she talked to Brandon at all?
She had not. So Brandon had been dog sitting for me actually on his birthday, because my daughter was in the state of Kentucky with family members there. Mm-hmm. And I had asked him to dog sit for me because I needed to go pick her up out of state. And so it was his birthday, and I kind of felt like, that he must have had plans, and he would have been excited to see her. And so the next morning she was excited, she wanted to see him, but she was getting her hair done. So then where I wanted to go first thing in the morning, she was making me wait, but she really wanted to see her brother. And of course, I'm trying to excuse him not answering, that, he slept in, he was playing video games, like just trying to rationalize all fears that I had, like that, because I did feel like there was something wrong. Like, why is he not answering me? And we get to his apartment.
You received a text earlier in the week, I believe, from him early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Is that normal for him? Does he normally text? I was because
no,
he doesn't normally text that early. Is he a day person?
He was more of a night person. He was not a morning person. I mean, he would get up and function and, go to work, but he really more came alive, I think, more in the night.
Like a text that was anything that was like dramatic, it was just a text, right?
Actually, it was a little dramatic.
Okay.
But the reason why I didn't put a lot of weight to it is that when I talked to Brandon, if it were a situation, if it were something wrong, Brandon's style was more paragraph style. He had very good command of language, his words, he could express himself. He was introverted, but if he had a feeling or had something to say, it would be a much longer expression of himself. And the text that he sent was a little off, but it was also very short.
Was this text about him not feeling well?
No, that would have been the day before.
Okay.
And so I was getting text about him saying that he had the worst headache ever. And I didn't think a lot of it because Brandon had migraines, but I also had migraines. So it was something we both dealt with. So when he said it was the worst headache ever, I really just thought it was just a bad migraine. To be honest, what I think now, looking back, I think it was someone had done something to him and was texting me things that had been done to him and what had happened to him.
That's sick.
Yeah, his phone had facial recognition, so it was, the capability was there for someone to hold up the phone to his face and to get on his phone.
Oh my God. So, when you got to his house, what was the state of what you could see at? I know you couldn't get into his house, but what did his apartment look like? What did you guys do when you got there?
So it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was September 12th, but it was so hot that day. It was extremely hot. And we got out, we knocked on the door, and I'm expecting like that he had been like up all night and had been asleep. So I'm expecting, you know, a groggy Brandon to wake up and come to the door. So we keep knocking, and then he never comes to the door, but his truck is there.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, his vehicle's here, so he should be here. So we keep knocking. We start knocking then on the windows, like maybe it'll make a different sound and he would hear that. So we're knocking on.
Would it be normal for him to be sleeping I mean, if he had headaches, I could see him sleeping, but is that something
Right.
that is that normal for him to be sleeping at 3 in the afternoon?
No, not really, not at all. That wouldn't be normal, but I'm just trying to rationalize. I'm just trying to think of,
Yeah.
you know, what could it be? You know, this, like his schedule is off, something is off. So I'm thinking, you know, that he stayed up late playing games and then decided to sleep in the daytime kind of thing, or not decided, but just, you know, that would be the explanation. So we're knocking on the windows and he has a back door. So I walk around to the back and I'm knocking on the back door, knocking on the windows. I noticed the back window is broken. It's a double paned window and it is the outside pane that is broke.
Oh, okay.
So we're knocking on the windows. He still doesn't answer. The neighbor is with me because, you know, he's telling me that he didn't see Brandon come or go, that usually, like, you know, he would see him and they would always say hi to each other.
Yeah.
And I think the neighbor was starting to sense that I was really concerned that he should be answering. And so he walked around back with me and I asked him, I said, do you think you could take the screen off? So maybe where the window is broken, I can holler through there. Like I can yell at him and he's going to hear me because, you know, it's, you know, easier to hear like maybe through that than where I'm like calling his name at the door. I did that. There was no answer. And I tried to look through the blind, but all I could see is just like the light coming through, but I couldn't see anything. I couldn't make anything out. So then that's when I'm like, we got to call 911. Something is not right. And then another person who did a podcast did the 911 call, and I didn't remember anything about the 911 call. I think at that point, that's when, you know, just that your
fear of what is going on.
Yeah. And so the police came and I didn't have a key and they said that they couldn't answer the door. And so I called the property management and they came and they brought a key and they opened the door and the police officers and the EMTs went in and I could hear them working, but I couldn't even really, I I couldn't even hear really where they were. I kind of heard like they were like in a direction, but not really even where they were in his apartment. And so we never went in. They asked for a sheet. And when they asked for a sheet to cover Brandon up, we looked at each other and we thought that meant that he was already gone.
Yeah.
And my daughter screamed. And when she screamed, I screamed just because, you know, it just overwhelmed me, like, you know, to hear her do that. And somebody asked me, like they had asked me how I felt, and it's just really indescribable. I mean, I honestly just felt like kind of outer body, if that makes sense. Like I felt like I was not, like I was there, but I felt like I was not like in my presence anymore. I don't know if that's a blood pressure thing. And
I think
they
it's
brought
more,
him out.
it happens to a lot of people when they're going through a traumatic moment. Everything's like almost feels like it's in slow motion.
And so then they pulled me to the side. They brought Brandon out, and all I could see was his face. They had him in a sheet. They had, you know, I guess oxygen or something on his face. So all I could just see was his face. And honestly, like he looked like an angel, like all the white, you know, the sheet. They were taking him to the hospital, which was actually really close by. And so my daughter and I followed in my car. They didn't offer for us to ride in the ambulance or anything. They took him to Randolph Health, and we went in the waiting room, and we were in there for hours. We hadn't heard anything. They weren't really telling us anything. Finally, we're sitting there, and, you know, I have no idea what's happened to him. I have no idea of anything. I have no, you know, and I didn't even know how bad his injuries were. And then all of a sudden, two detectives walk up to us and say they wanted to ask us some questions. And I mean, I was just completely just not understanding, like, well, you know, like Brandon just seemed like someone who keeps to himself. He doesn't have any kind of problems with anyone. He was in his apartment. I didn't know of him having any friends or any girlfriends or anything. So I just couldn't understand why these detectives are asking questions. Like I didn't know if he had a fall. Had no explanation for what was going on.
Yeah.
And they ask us a lot of questions, and then we eventually get to go back and see him. He's intubated. They're telling me that it doesn't look good, and they don't think he's going to make it, and they have to transfer him to a higher level of care.
Now, what did the hospital say? What did they say to you about his condition? Like, did they say in this hospital before they transferred him, did they say what they thought, that not that they knew what had happened, but that it was a fall, or they thought, what did they say?
At the ER, they didn't really say.
Okay.
I think it was just initially right then at that point at this hospital. Later he's transferred, and then I will start asking a lot of questions. But at this point, they're just really trying to inform me that they don't think that he's going to make it. And the emergency room doctor is showing me why. He shows me the urine bag, and he said, if you look at this, he said, this is, and it's got all this like sediment in it. A lot of it, it's like particles in the urine bag. And he said his kidneys are breaking down. And then he shows me his toes. And even though Brandon was alive, he was telling me that it's like stages of him decomposing.
Yeah. Were they black or?
Yes, like they had wounds, but the wounds were black.
Okay.
And then he said that Brandon had been down for days. And this later becomes a point that I have to figure out because, later on, there's going to be this conflicting information about, okay, was he down for days or was he down for, a day?
Yeah, hours or a day. Yeah. Oh.
So then they transfer him to Moses Cone Hospital in Greensboro, North Carolina.
How far is Asheboro from Greensboro?
Probably about 30 to 40 minutes.
Okay.
We went to Moses Cone, and then each of the hospital staff, I started asking questions like, what do you think happened to him? And, also when they found him, he was in a hypothermic state. So initially what they did was to, I think they called it a bear warmer or a bear hugger. So they had like covered him up. They had him like packed with blankets.
Mm-hmm.
So really I didn't see like all those injuries initially. But then they decided that the cooler temperatures were actually helping him. So they had taken the blankets off. And then, we could see these bruises on his legs. On his ankles, his feet, his arms, his hands. He was just covered in bruises. And the bruises on his legs were the sizes of sheets of paper. It was just unbelievable. I'd never seen anything like that before myself.
Photos of he was brutalized.
Yes. I start talking to the staff, each one that had come in, and a lot of them said that, all of them said there was no way he could have done this to himself. I asked them, could this have come from some kind of fall? And they said no, that they said there was no way he could do this to himself. And they said, actually, he looked like someone who had been hit by a car. He looked like victims that had come in who had been in, this kind of like as someone hit. And so,
I mean, he has extreme trauma to his body.
Yes, all over.
Yeah.
All over his body. And there were so many injuries that I didn't see because where he was covered with his gown, there were injuries on his torso, his sides, everywhere. And I won't even see those for a long time yet. But he was covered in bruises, head to toe, front to back. He was just bruised everywhere. And I just couldn't understand.
Hold on one second. You told me there are places where he was bruised, like the back of his knees.
Yes.
There were places that he wouldn't be able to do himself.
Yes. And I won't see those. Actually, Brandon has passed away now. It's been 1 year and 9 months, which was just on the 13th of this month. And it's only recently that I had seen some of the autopsy photos, but I hadn't seen all of the photos. And I finally knew that I had to look at all of them because there's still so many questions about his death. When I look at the autopsy photos, I see even more bruising that I hadn't seen before because when the ambulance took Brandon, they put a cervical collar on him and that covered, all of this area. So there was a lot I couldn't see. When I see the autopsy photos, there is also bruising all around his neck. And it's not until the crime scene photos that I see there's also bruising on the back, like right under the collar. There's this just dark black bruising that's coming out from under, and all over his back is bruised. The sides are bruised.
There was also an injury to the back of his neck near the skull, or at the base of his skull. What was that injury like?
And I'm still looking at that, but if you are able to see the blood pattern that was on his bedroom floor,
Yeah.
there is a blood spray that's coming out of the back of his head.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they had said when they looked at the crime scene was that he had pneumonia and he was aspirating this blood out, that he was like coughing this blood. But if you look at the blood pattern, that's coming out of the back of his head,
not the front. Yeah.
and you can't cough out of the back of your head. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And
that photo, that, because I did view that photo last night, it's very circular.
Yes.
Is that bone exposed? Because there's white. Is that bone? Because I couldn't tell from my photo, but I'm looking online. I'm not looking at the actual picture.
So which photo?
The photo of the back of his head, neck, the base of his skull. It was circular.
Yeah, there's some really weird lines, like very dark lines. To me, it looks like that it's split open.
Yeah.
And there's also like a place on his neck that looks like it's open.
Yes.
And there was a CT scan done, and if you look closely, the bones are out of not a little, but a lot. It's off to the side, and it looks like he had a broken neck. They put this, I don't understand why they have someone who's beaten and bruised like this, and they say, well, maybe it's scoliosis. And it's really bad, because then I find out that he had actually been to that same hospital. This is September, and he had been in that hospital in April, and they had also done a scan. So they had something to compare it to.
Oh.
And there was nothing found as far as his neck. There was nothing wrong. So then now, where he's beaten and they see a curvature in his neck, they end up trying to call this scoliosis.
Yeah, they have something to compare it to, and they didn't.
No. And I've heard of scoliosis before. I've never heard of anyone with scoliosis of the neck. I don't know how common that is, but they just glossed over it. Maybe
or almost
because
spontaneous scoliosis. It was just a few months. April to September isn't that long. So he magically spontaneous got scoliosis over, a few months.
Right.
It makes no sense.
And that's going to seem how they come to the conclusion for a lot of these injuries and organ failures and things like that, that they try to say that it's natural, even though he has all these bruisings and these things don't make any sense.
So what other injuries did he have? Was there anything that really made you wonder what is wrong? Something's really wrong here.
Yes, there definitely was. When I start looking at those autopsy photos, which was actually recently, which I had read on the autopsy that he had a hemorrhage of his tongue, and I hadn't understand why that happened. But then I look, and the inside of his lip has this black and purple bruising and the imprints of his teeth. And it really looks like someone smothered him.
Yeah. Those
because
are
there's not
that come with smothering.
That's what it looks like between the injuries on the tongue, the hemorrhaging, the bruising inside his mouth without the corresponding marks on the outside of his face. And the bruising, of course, around his neck was just very, just very dark. It goes all the way around.
Do you think he was possibly strangled?
I think it's possible. I'm trying to figure out what this bruising is. I'm still looking.
Or maybe some sort of restraint?
Yes, we definitely think that there were restraints involved. Brandon was a big guy. He was very strong. Brandon had once before been into the bodybuilding. He had a lot of strength.
Okay.
So it could have been something that was done to him to subdue him.
Yeah.
We noticed that there was bruising on his genitals and on his scrotum, and the bruising is something that in my life I could never imagine. And this is something that makes me think that someone did this to take him down. The bruising is just indescribable.
Yeah.
The other bruising is right across the backs of his knees. That looks like a lot of the bruising, the detective had said, was rod shaped. And it even says in the search warrant that they were looking for something rod shaped like a bat, or I believe they took a metal pipe into evidence, something that was rod shaped that they thought he had been struck with. But there was bruisings right across the backs of both knees, and bruisings also on the bottoms, the soles of his feet, on his heels. So he definitely had, he was just bruised everywhere, everywhere, all over his body.
And it makes no sense that his murder was considered by the police to be self-inflicted.
The bruising around his eyes is also an indicator of a skull fracture. Mm-hmm. So to me, that should have been something that they were looking at really closely. And I feel like they didn't, like, even with the CT scan, they were calling it scoliosis.
Yeah. And also he had injuries to his hands. Were his hands swollen?
His hands were swollen. They were bruised on the tops of them. At that time in the hospital, we didn't flip his hands over. He was in such a delicate condition. We just were so, like, gentle and tried not to disturb him in any way. Something that I noticed, though, from the time they brought him out of his apartment to the time that he died, he never moved. He never moved. Even when he had a seizure, the normal seizure where someone would, their arms would flail, he didn't have a seizure like that. His entire body lifted up. So it almost seems like he did have a skull fracture, a broken neck, those types of injuries.
So
and that he had
possibly
suffered.
Paralyzed at that point?
I think he was paralyzed, and I think that explains why when he had the seizure, there was, well, he had multiple seizures, but there was no flailing, there was no movement of any kind.
Yeah.
Then later on the autopsy photos, that we see that he has cuts on the wrist, on the inside of his wrist, and cuts on his palms, bruises on his palms.
Were you said there was both wrists that had markings on it?
Or one wrist has a deep, I don't really know if I would say like a cut. It's almost like a rip. It's almost like his wrist is ripped, because it's jagged and it's so deep that the adipose layer, the fat layer, is coming out of that cut. And then on the other wrist, there are marks, but they're not the same. They are different.
Were those bleeding? The marks on the wrist?
And strangely, no. And
That
it was a
means they
very
were-
deep cut.
Though that means they were healing at that point. Because if they're not bleeding, they're in a state of healing.
Yeah, so I suppose that would be a state of healing. I mean, I just don't know, because as deep as it was, it seems like there should have been a pool of blood somewhere.
Especially where
And
they found him, where he was
Right.
found, there should have been some blood. That's why I say if the gouge is so deep that he would have been bleeding from it, that means if he wasn't bleeding, it might have been cleaned and he was in some state of healing. Maybe it was only a few hours, but the bleeding probably stopped at that point.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, because I haven't been able to figure out, I see the cut and I'm like, where is the blood? Because there should be a significant amount of blood from a cut that deep and that size.
Yeah.
So those are good points. I mean, just definitely something that, I'll keep in mind as I still keep trying to understand
Everything
what happened and everything that happened to him.
Yeah. Now, how long was he in the hospital before he passed away?
Total time from the time they picked him up, I believe was somewhere around 28 hours.
Okay.
So it was, I think about 3:45 when they arrived, and then the next night, which was Friday the 13th, he passed away a couple of minutes right before 9 p.m.
And I am so sorry for your family's loss, and I am so
Thank
sorry
you.
that you are going through this. A mother should never have to bury their child, and a mother should never have to be investigating their son's murder. The police should be doing this. And
Yes.
it's not right that you're the person who's doing it. Of course, you're his mom, you're going to turn into Mama Bear and do what you can for your son, but you shouldn't have to. The police should be solving this murder, and instead close it and put it on a shelf. Actually, don't even put it on the shelf. We're going to get into that later, but they just did not do him justice, and they didn't do your family justice. And I'm so sorry that you guys have had to deal with that end of everything.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, did the police come back and ask you any questions at the other hospital?
No, they did not come to Moses Cone Hospital. I believe the detective did call and talk to the medical staff.
Okay.
It does state it states on the search warrant that the medical personnel told him that there was no way that he could have self-inflicted these injuries. And, that's stated, and then the story will turn around about that, but that is documented in the search warrant, that he has defensive wounds. He has wounds that he could not have self-inflicted. And it's just so bizarre how this whole case turns around.
Yes, it definitely is. It's a lot to take in. It's definitely a lot to take in. And Brandon's story is tragic because he was murdered, and also the police didn't do their job and give him justice. And it's heartbreaking that, he went through this, and you guys continue to go through the heartache of not knowing what happened to him.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
So we're going to make a part 2. So make sure you come and watch part 2 of our segment. So I am Mizzy, and I'm a mixed girl in a mixed up world. Thank you, guys.